It's episode 13. Please sign up to Patreon if you'd like to vote for content, and guys, keep an eye out for channel memberships which I'll be launching very soon. But now we have an extra special episode, our first look at a video game civilization. It's Columbia from BioShock Infinite. After plumbing the depraved depths of liberty in BioShock 1 and 2, Irrational Games continues their heavily political series with BioShock Infinite, another mind-bending cautionary tale on the dangers of extreme ideologies, which I'm sure we can't use to draw any parallels with today's world. Enter Columbia, a city that was commissioned as a showcase of American exceptionalism, which rapidly de-evolved into an ultra-nationalist, xenophobic, militarized theocracy, surprising absolutely no one at all. Yep, these guys were repping a fascist-like ideology before it was even a thing. There, I've said it now. After massacring some Chinese civilians during the Boxer Rebellion, the US administration attempted to bring Columbia to heel, at which point the founders ascended Columbia into the clouds, seceding from the states, enshrining their beliefs in law and unleashing their oppressive policies onto Columbia's population. Styling themselves after the founding fathers of America, the founders are a bunch of rabid ideologues, led by Father Zachary Hale Comstock, a self-proclaimed prophet espousing pseudo-Protestant propaganda while ruling over a brutally classist, inequitable society. But at least it looks like heaven, as long as you like heaven segregated, deeply racist, and heavily armed. We enter this mess as protagonist Booker DeWitt, a down-and-out gumshoe who was hired by these two, brought through an interdimensional rift to Columbia, tasked with a mission to rescue the girl and wipe away his debt, or so he thinks. We soon discover this Elizabeth girl has some reality warping powers herself, supposedly the daughter of Comstock, imprisoned and conditioned, with the hopes that she will one day rule Columbia and take the pain to the heathens on the surface. But after hopping through several different realities, the mind-boggling truth is revealed. Comstock is actually an alternate reality version of Booker DeWitt, who assumed a new identity after a baptism. Eventually establishing Columbia, he used a machine designed by the Lutecers to view alternate realities, the basis for his prophecies. But this machine left him sterile and prematurely aged, so he popped over into Booker's reality almost 20 years ago, offering to wipe away his debt in exchange for his infant daughter, which Booker accepted but immediately regretted, causing a scuffle which saw baby Anna sever her pinky, making her a child of two realities, and somehow bestowing her with these funky powers. And current day Booker got a bit confused about his own history, thanks to some reality hopping induced brain hemorrhaging. Robert and his sister Rosalind being the ones who enlisted Booker to save a now renamed Elizabeth. There, you got all that? Obviously, all of these alternate realities throws a bit of a spanner in the works when it comes to nailing down our gripes. But not to worry folks, there is some stupidity which I think is common to all Columbias we see. Point 1. An oppressive, inequitable society invites rebellion. We start out in what we'll call Columbia Prime. It's an impressive looking city and probably a heavenly place to live, as long as you're a rich, white, obedient Christian. But for everyone else, it's hellish. Before you even do anything, your status is predetermined by your race and background. Daisy Fitzroy, for example, who is said to have a genius level IQ, is forced to live as a servant.
Wringing the linen, scrubbing the floors. Lady Comstock, she even had a kind word now and then. Almost enough to make me think I had a place in their world.
Way to underutilize the available talent.
Just some foolishness, you know. Just monkey shines.
Besides the lack of upward mobility, citizens are bombarded by wafer-thin propaganda and subjected to an intrusive behavioral code, ruthlessly enforced by an expansive police and military force. Most disturbing of all, murderous automatons and cyborgs. Persecution of non-white races is commonplace. Relationships between whites and blacks illegal, resulting in death or imprisonment, while supporters of basic labor reforms are ostracized, vilified, tortured, or jailed. The Fraternal Order of the Raven also covertly carries out the dirty work of Comstock and the founders, murdering, attacking, and kidnapping all those who stand against their ideals. The supposed undesirables are denied basic civil rights and forced into a life of indentured servitude, relegated to slums where criminals can act with impunity, with 50% of their already pitiful income going as a tithe to Comstock.
50% of everything people earn here goes right to Comstock as a tithe.
Subject to exploitative business practices and a lack of steady work.
Why is it, Mr. Fink, that we have to work 16 hours a day?
All of which causes widespread poverty, disease, and starvation. And obviously, social welfare just isn't a thing here. This is mostly administered by this guy, Fink, a powerful member of the Founders, and probably, like most of them, an opportunist who rode to power on the coattails of Comstock and the Lutece's machine. He's anything but a true believer.
Prophecy nonsense. I tell you, belief is just a commodity.
In fact, he's more of a threat to Comstock than anything, since he's the second most powerful man in the entire city, and he's looking to hire our boy Booker, a sworn enemy of Comstock and the supposed false prophet.
DeWitt, Fink here. Listen, my boy, we've had our eye on you, and I can tell you right now that you are our top candidate. Top!
And you thought Comstock's propaganda was bad. Fink's propaganda is literally insulting to the very people he's targeting.
The lions, whose purpose is to keep order amongst the lesser creatures. Then, you have the cow, the beasts of burden.
Despite contributing to the enforcement of Columbia's racist policies, this cheeky Fink prick has taken most of his good ideas from an Asian scientist living in Rapture. Over the years, Comstock and the Founders have allowed Fink to use his trans-dimensional advantage and gobble up almost every other business, resulting in a state-controlled monopoly supplying nearly every good available in Columbia. That's right, the Founders have taken bad ideas from all over the political spectrum. So with these atrocious labor and living conditions, disaffected groups are forced to come together in the name of mere survival. Enter the Vox Populi, founded by Daisy Fitzroy after Comstock framed her for the murder of his whistleblower wife. Daisy was forced to finally use her impressive intellect for more subversive pursuits. The Vox were originally a non-violent protest movement, but after a series of clashes with police, possible false flag events, and an incident resulting in numerous worker deaths, the Vox went on the down low, becoming far more militant and willing to commit acts of violence in the name of their cause, though most in the upper classes seem to support the Founders' ideals.
An Oriental stopped me on the street and asked me for the time. Just like that. There should be a law. I think there is.
There are still a few progressives willing to sign up with the Vox Populi and help the plight of the underclass. And it's no wonder, with no room for competitive businesses, all of these guys must be working for Fink or the government, giving up half their income or maybe subsisting off their dwindling trust funds. The situation is surely untenable even for them, despite indoctrinating the population from birth and being at the helm of an expansive police state overseeing a fairly tiny territory. The Founders have failed to stamp out the Vox in 17 years. You'd think a floating city would make it impossible to go underground. Now with Booker's help, they're gearing up for a revolution.
There's a gunsmith who can supply weapons to our cause. Get our guns from him, and you shall have your ship back.
With arms supplied by this Chinese guy, Chen Lin, who for some reason was allowed to set up shop as a gunsmith, considering he will suffer persecution in this city and probably sympathize with the Vox. That seems like a pretty reckless oversight by the Founders. Columbia may have originally been an American territory which allowed free movement, but Chen Lin immigrated to Columbia long after they achieved independence. Fink has also been importing indentured servants such as Daisy for years.
I have a man in Georgia who'll lease us as many Negro convicts as you can board.
For a society that detests other races so much, they're sure intent on bringing a lot of these people here. Sure, they want a source of cheap labor, but while intentionally creating an underclass, they've failed to consider the massive risk this could pose to their society in the long run. So the Founders finally rid themselves of Chen Lin in the Columbia Prime universe, leading Elizabeth to open a tear to another reality to get the goods, which to be honest doesn't seem like a great idea since their deal was with Daisy from Columbia Prime, and by their own admission they aren't sure if they can ever get back.
If we go into this tear, I don't think I'll be able to bring us back.
But oh well, let's just go with it. In this reality, the Vox are in a more advanced stage of revolt, though the founders haven't killed Chen, merely confiscated his tools, leading our hero and Elizabeth to another version of Columbia. And this is where the Vox have really achieved some solid headway. Now heavily armed thanks to Chen, the Vox here have ignited a full-blown revolution. Seizing the means of production easily, they take the pain to the founders, occupying their facilities, killing numerous party members, and eventually obliterating the police and military. Then, after killing Fink, Daisy goes too far and gets taken out by Elizabeth, causing the leaderless Vox to rampage around the city, killing innocents and putting Columbia to the torch, which ironically makes this version of the Vox like the demons the founders always warned of, a self-fulfilling prophecy. So in summary, there is a grand total of at least 3 different realities in which the Vox and Chen Lin were gearing up for civil war. In truth, there's probably far more. The founders don't seem to differ much between realities, so most of them we can assume are similar to Columbia Prime, in which the founders created the perfect storm of circumstances, guaranteed to cause an organized resistance against them. As if that wasn't damning enough, Comstock is responsible for even more grievous errors which may cause Columbia's literal downfall. Point 2. Comstock attempts to kill Rosalind Lutece, the person primarily responsible for Columbia's technological advancement, but instead he transforms her and her brother into indomitable demigods. Rosalind Lutece, a brilliant quantum physicist and another non-believer who took advantage of Comstock's ambition. She came up with the theory of quantum levitation and developed the technology which suspends atoms at a fixed point indefinitely, allowing Comstock to achieve his dream of a floating Columbia, selling her soul for a bit of funding. But she obviously didn't lock it down tight enough to prevent Columbia's buildings bobbing around everywhere. I guess Booker doesn't have time to puke.
I'm experiencing dizziness and disorientation.
Rosalind also developed the machine which allowed access to other realities, eventually getting in touch with a male version of herself called Robert from Booker's universe, who she now creepily refers to as her brother, having turned a blind eye to all of Comstock's crap, creating the siphons which control Elizabeth's power and orchestrating a bit of trans-dimensional cradle snatching. Rosalind is not exactly a saint herself, but her brother eventually grows a conscience once they hear of Comstock's future plans for war with the surface, threatening to abandon Rosalind unless they seek to correct their error.
My brother has presented me with an ultimatum. If we do not send the girl back from where we brought her, he and I must part.
They both agree to reunite Elizabeth with her real father in an effort to manipulate the course of history. But Comstock gets wind of the Lutece's plans and has Fink sabotage their machine in an attempt to kill them both.
Comstock has sabotaged our contraption, yet we are not dead.
Instead, it spreads them across realities, bestowing them with godlike powers to travel time and space indefinitely, making pawns of mere mortals. And so committed to their plans against Comstock, they've brought Booker to Columbia a grand total of 122 times, only to fail and die before we took the controls. Obviously, the odds of them succeeding on that front seem exceptionally low, but odds are irrelevant to these immortals, who can now manipulate the realities forever until the desired result is reached. These two are now basically impossible to defeat. The fall of Columbia, in some sense, guaranteed.
This is becoming rather awkward.
Yeah, that kind of backfired spectacularly on Comstock there. His reckless assassination plan is definitely his most grievous single error, for a number of reasons. No one aside from perhaps Rosalind and her brother seems to understand how her levitation technology actually works. He's hoping that technology never breaks down, or Columbia could be in serious trouble.
Attempting to level our descent!
Granted, Comstock had to do something about their plans, but a more preferable option would have been to simply expel or imprison Rosalind and her brother, confiscate their machine, and make the best of it. And if they must die, why mess around with their machine at all when a few bullets and another cover-up would have sufficed? This machine is essential to both Comstock and Fink's operations, but they were willing to destroy it for the sake of killing the Luteces, a prospect which should have seemed far from certain anyway. But wait, there's more. Even without the Lutece twins or the Vox Populi stirring things up, Columbia was probably always doomed to fall. Point 3. Comstock's kingdom was already vulnerable to collapse. His reckless actions and other policies increased the chances of disaster. It's Sky Daddy Comstock, a charismatic grifter who was so committed to racism, he once slaughtered a bunch of Native Americans just to quash a rumor he was part Native himself, though he apparently felt remorseful since he sought to wash away his sins via a baptism, then went on to force his extremist beliefs and brutality onto an entire city. Is this what he calls born again?
If we were home, he'd be sent to prison.
Comstock has gone to great lengths to rewrite his own history and reinterpret historical events, weaving an almost entirely phony mythos around him, with a fundamentalist Christian slant, casting the supposedly immoral surface world as the enemy, yet weirdly embracing morally questionable technology that is so powerful and otherworldly you'd be forgiven for thinking it's witchcraft. Though Comstock styles himself as a prophet, it's pretty obvious he considers himself more a god. But as a cancer-riddled old man of 38, I'd say that's wishful thinking.
The illusion of control.
The trouble with leadership that relies on a cult of personality and the good optics of one man is that Comstock's own personal weaknesses and failings can affect the entire civilization. And although this guy does market himself as an imperfect vessel of God's word, he has more than a few skeletons in his closet, and he's dumb enough to leave his darkest secrets just lying around the place on voxophones.
It was only when I burnt the teepees with the squaws inside did they take me as one of their own.
Like another sick religious dictator we've encountered, Comstock's civilization will most likely die with him. Guilty by association, the other founders do nothing to stop Comstock steering them into ruin. And yet without their dear prophet, they will find it exceptionally difficult to control the masses. But to be fair on Comstock, he is painfully aware of this.
The Archangel tells me that Columbia will only survive so long as my line sits the throne.
Unable to seat an heir himself, he snatches Elizabeth, and upon discovering her powers and Lady Comstock's unwillingness to go along with the whole charade, he imprisons Elizabeth on Monument Island to live a life of solitude, experimentation, and conditioning. She's basically a lab rat, circumstances which I'm sure won't cause severe psychological issues, and a fair dose of resentment if she finds out the truth of her existence. Seems like a great recipe for a Comstock heir, though her powers are supposedly in check. Elizabeth's handlers have for some reason deemed it appropriate to give her books that teach her about lockpicking.
Trapped in a tower with nothing but books and spare time?
Watched over by the Songbird, who is more than adequate in terms of muscle. Though should Elizabeth escape, I'd say this monstrous creature would find it difficult to navigate the confines of Columbia. Even weirder, he's controlled by a pan flute. That seems a bit imprecise. After seeing a possible future in which Booker will come to rescue Elizabeth, Comstock sets about weaving another prophecy, claiming Booker to be the false prophet. Yet despite being aware of Booker's potential arrival, their security gates are all but secure, and Columbia's border control is extremely inadequate. Using a code, Booker rides a rocket up, and from there it's just a simple baptism process. Surprisingly lax for a nation of authoritarian xenophobes. You'd think that at least do a background check. After Booker is uncovered, Comstock puts out the alert, and the full might of the military and police are brought to bear against Booker. But then recklessly, just as he is nearing Monument Island and Elizabeth, Comstock tells his last line of defense to stand down for a bit of desperate trickery. Booker abducting Elizabeth was Comstock's greatest fear, yet with Monument Island currently abandoned due to some unspecified hazards, taking her was probably the easiest part of the whole endeavor. And are we sure these guys are still maintaining the siphon adequately? Because honestly, it seems like Elizabeth could just step through that. This, combined with her skills as an escape artist, Comstock's lucky she's still here at all. Now they rely on Songbird entirely, but instead of keeping her confined, it gets so ruckus, it dismantles part of the prison and its siphon, doing our heroes a massive favor. Along the way, we chug back some of these vigors, transforming all those who drink it into highly dangerous mutants, including one 1 vigor, which grants the ability to possess the Founder's soldiers and defense automatons. You can even use it to steal from their vending machines, and they give that one away for free. I have no idea why Chen-Lin and the Vox were so fixated on constructing weaponry, because honestly there are plenty of armaments and vigors to steal around here. Combine this with the fact there is a lack of appropriate safety barriers. The suicide and accidental death rates of this city must be astronomical.
To arms, brothers!
Later on, Comstock's phony past comes back to haunt him. He apparently thought it wise to weave a new narrative of the events of Wounded Knee, which is rather short-sighted since Cornelius Slate, a prominent founder and military leader who was at that battle, is right here in Columbia. After hitting Comstock up for his BS, Slate was stripped of his rank and titles, leading him to recruit a band of loyalists and form an alliance with the Vox Populi, eventually sacking the Hall of Heroes in a suicide run. I'd say it's probably better to keep your popular military leaders on side. Fast forward to the alternate Vox Revolution Columbia. Booker is finally drawing close to Comstock House and the man himself. Release one version of him. Driven by desperation, Comstock triggers a hidden siphon near his wife's corpse, drawing power from Elizabeth and transforming his former wife into a powerful entity. I'm noticing a bit of a pattern here. He's created another demigod and this one hates him with a passion. She was already sour about her husband and his brutal policies. Then Comstock went and murdered her. Now superpowered, still enraged, and with the full truth revealed. Comstock is just lucky she didn't fly away and find her traitorous wretch of a husband. But surely Comstock's most ambitious plan doesn't have similar logical failings, right? Yeah, nah. You see, unlike almost everyone else around here, Comstock seems to actually buy into his own bullshit, ignoring the inconvenient truth that the future realities he views through the tears are based on probability as opposed to a guaranteed outcome.
What Comstock failed to understand is that our contraption is a window not into prophecy, but probability.
He begins portraying Columbia as another ark for another time, except this ark is armed to the teeth and intends to bring about the flood itself. He bases this prophecy on a possible future in which Elizabeth has taken up her father's cause, attacking the surface world, New York apparently, in 1984. Well, even if Comstock can steer his reality towards this future, so what? Did you see Elizabeth and Columbia victorious against the entire world? As if taking on America wasn't daunting enough, you've also got their allies to worry about. I'm doubtful Columbia could win a war against the world when our story is set in 1912, let alone the world of 1984.
Yes, but their sensors and tactical systems would be disrupted for several seconds.
Ever see any of them nukes through one of those tears? Columbia might be able to pull off a campaign against one city, but does Comstock honestly think it's going to go well for them after that? This is most likely a ruinous future for Columbia. It sure looks like it. Presumably they would maintain some form of technological superiority, but in terms of defense, a floating city and slow-moving airships are just sitting ducks.
Confirmed. I am reading a debris field encompassing nearly 80 cubic kilometers.
Even this future conqueror Elizabeth is remorseful for her actions against New York. I don't imagine she'll be carrying on this campaign. In fact, she's trying to stop it from happening in the first place. Maybe Comstock should find a tear which reveals what's happening in 1985 or later. You're going to want to see how things pan out, not one to hold his hand close to his chest. Comstock starts openly prophesizing the Sodom Below's downfall. We already know how loose their borders are. That's at least 72 years for this info to leak out. It's doubtful Columbia would catch America unawares. But with Booker, the Lutesses, and multiple Elizabeths manipulating the various timelines, the prospect of Columbia even lasting until 1984 seems highly unlikely. Back in 1912, Booker scores a hollow victory by killing one version of Comstock, utterly condemning this Columbia reality to its doom. After destroying the siphon completely and taking a brief excursion to Rapture to kill Songbird, Elizabeth's power seems to have reached its full potential, now able to sift through through the different realities, she reveals the truth of Booker's identity and history to him, and devises a method to wipe out Comstock once and for all. It's an even greater level of destruction than what was wrought against the Cyclos. Elizabeth kills Booker before his baptism choice, which apparently eliminates Comstock and Columbia from existence in every reality and timeline. With their stupidity possibly spread across an infinite number of dimensions, I'd say that's only fitting. Though usually I'd be the first to admit the title of my series is interpreted fairly loosely. For once, I think we've actually found a civilization which is truly too stupid to exist. Well, that is, until Irrational Games release some downloadable content. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for a patented vigor and use one of only 2 guns to blast that like button.